Hey guys, Mr. Wilhelm here. Today we are going to work on predicting genetic outcomes by using Punnett squares. As we've discussed previously, uh, organisms pass on traits from parents to offspring. We call that heredity. And these traits, these specific characteristics, have genes in them. And those genes are what ultimately determine what an organism will look like, okay, how it will be shaped, its color, its size, and its other characteristics. So we're going to use Punnett squares to predict possible outcomes that we might have in offspring if we are given the genes of the two parents. So in this particular case, we're just going to run through a bunch of examples and just practice. So as I've used my example in the past of my hair color and my wife's hair color and my son's hair color, um, we're going to put in an example of that here, and I'm going to use the letter H to represent hair color. All right, a capital H represents dominant a dominant allele for hair color, and a lowercase h represents recessive, represents a recessive allele for hair color. So capital H is dominant, lowercase h is recessive. And again, it doesn't matter what letter you use. You can use any letter, but what's important is that you use the same letter. It has to always be the same letter within a particular Punnett square. And also that you understand that the capital letter is dominant and the lowercase is recessive. Now, we know that in hair color, that brown hair is dominant. Okay. And then we also know that blonde hair is recessive. Brown is dominant, blonde is recessive. Okay, so in this situation, I have these two alleles. Remember that I get one allele from one parent, the other allele from the other parent. Okay, so I have two alleles for every trait. I'm going to say that this up here is dad, and then I'm going to say mom has the same genetic code. Okay, this is mom. Now, what I do is I'm simply going to cross the two genetic codes and each of the offspring, and I have four offspring here. I got one, two, three, and four. I've got four offspring. Um, each of the offspring are going to get one of these alleles from mom, and they're going to get the other allele from dad. Because in sexual reproduction, 50% of the genetic information is mom, and 50% of the genetic information is dad. And this is a real simple cross. I take this capital H right here, and I'm going to pull it down, and I'm going to write it in this box. I'm going to take this capital H here, and I'm going to take it over, and I'm going to write it in this box. Okay, so where the two intersect is where you fill in the letters. And then this lower h, drop it down, and put it here. And then again, this capital H is going to go over, and I'll put it here. Somebody asked me, does it matter whether the capital comes first or the lowercase? No, it really doesn't matter. I always like to keep the capital first if there's a capital letter there, just to make it easier. And then again, for this number 3 box here, I'm going to drop down this capital H, and I'm going to take this lowercase and come over, okay? And for this 4 box right here, I'm going to drop down this lowercase h, and then I'm going to bring this other lowercase h over. Okay, so this is my genetic outcome. This is the probability that I'll have these particular outcomes in the offspring. Okay, so capital H, capital H. Okay, a dominant allele for brown. Dominant allele for brown means that this right here is brown. Here I have a dominant allele for brown and a recessive allele for blonde, but remember that this dominant overtakes the blonde, therefore this is still brown. Okay? Here I've got a dominant allele for brown and a recessive allele for blonde, but again, that dominant allele overtakes the recessive, overpowers the recessive, so this is still brown. And then here I have a recessive allele for blonde and a recessive allele for blonde. There is no brown. There's no brown even in the picture there. Okay, therefore this has no other option but to be blonde. Okay, so in going back to the example of my wife and myself, I have brown hair. My wife has brown hair. Okay, however, my son has blonde hair. Okay, so by looking at my son, looking at our offspring, I know that I must be carrying an allele for blonde. My wife must be carrying an allele for blonde. Therefore, my son, 1 out of 4 chance. Okay, there's 4 quadrants here. Okay, that's 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%, which equals 100%. So 1 out of 4, or 25% chance that my son was going to get blonde hair, and he just so happened to get that blonde hair. Okay, let's go down here and look at another example. Okay. Let's say that in this case, we'll still use hair color. We're going to say that, okay, this particular parent still has brown hair, but still has that recessive allele for blonde. And then this parent has brown hair, but has two dominant alleles. Two dominant alleles for brown. Now remember, if we have 2 letters that are the same, that equals, well, a term that we call homozygous. Okay, if they're the same, it's homozygous. If the letters are different, it is heterozygous. Homozygous and heterozygous. Yes, the letter is still letter H, letter H. However, this is a capital H and this is a lowercase h, so they're not the exact same. Okay, hetero means different. Homo means the same. Okay, so let's do our cross real quick. We drop down that H. This H comes over. H, H. Okay, this H comes down. This H goes over. Okay, this H again comes down. This H is going over. This H is coming down. This H is going over. So now if I look at this particular genetic outcome, remember that capital H is brown, lowercase h is blonde. Okay, this one right here is all the way brown. This one right here, I've got that dominant allele for brown. Even though I've got a recessive allele for blonde, this is still brown. This one right here is obviously all the way brown. And this right here, I've got this dominant allele for brown, recessive allele for blonde, but this is still brown. Okay? So if we barely change this up, if we said that I have a dominant allele for brown, a recessive for blonde, but my wife has dominant brown, homozygous brown, okay, then that there is 0% chance. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, but all of those are brown. So it's a 0% chance of having blonde. Okay. Now, also keep in mind as we're going through this that genetic code right here, the genetic code equals the genotype. Okay. And then the color, brown, what we actually see, the physical characteristic equals phenotype. Okay. This is the fancy science word for, okay, that particular hair color characteristic. And this is the fancy science word for genetic code. All right. Let's go through some different examples using some different letters now. Okay, so let's talk about eye color instead of hair color. We're going to use the letter E to represent eye color. And we're going to say that a capital E, we know is dominant, but in this case, dominant eye color is brown. And we're going to use the lowercase e, which is recessive. A recessive eye color is blue. Okay. Again, we're using the same letters. You got E, 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 E. They're all E's. We're going to use the same letter because it's the same trait that we're looking at. We're looking at eye color, so we have to use the same letter. Okay. It just depends upon if it's a capital E, which is dominant. Capital E is dominant. Lowercase e is recessive. So then we do our cross. Okay, we're going to take this E down. And I always like to put the capital first. Take this E over. This E down. This E over. Okay. This E down. This E over. This E down. This E over. Okay, so in this particular instance, I've got capital E, lowercase e. I've got dominant brown, recessive blue. Okay. The dominant overtakes the blue. Therefore, this right here, this first one is going to be brown. Okay. Brown. And it just so happens that in this case, this is also going to be brown. The dominant E overtakes the recessive blue. The dominant brown overtakes the recessive blue. So this is brown, this is brown, this is brown. So the probability that these offspring are going to have brown eyes is 4 out of 4, which equals 100%. Okay. Okay. So 4 out of 4, 100% brown. Let's look at another example. Let's talk about height. Okay, height. Now I'm going to use a completely different letter here. Doesn't matter what letter I use. I'm going to use the letter, let's use the letter T, for example, for height. Okay, so we're talking about height, and we're going to use the letter T. Now, T equals tall. So a capital T is dominant. A lowercase t equals short. Short is recessive. Okay. So I'm going to say I have T, let's say T. And so I've got this person right here. So dad, is he short or is he tall? Okay. This is dad. Is dad short or tall? Well, you would say that he is tall because tall is dominant. I've got this capital T. It overtakes this lowercase t. So he's tall, but he's still carrying that recessive gene for being short. Mom. Is mom, okay, short or tall? Well, she's got a recessive for short and a recessive for short. There's no dominant allele there, so mom is short. So I do my cross here, okay? Oh, I did that backwards. All right, so now we got an interesting combination. Here I have capital T, lowercase t. The dominant tall overtakes the recessive short, so this is tall. Here I have recessive T, short, short, so this is short. Here I have dominant T, dominant tall, recessive short. The dominant overtakes the recessive, so this is going to be tall. And here I have recessive short, so it has to be short. So in this situation, what is the probability that the offspring will be tall? Well, I've got two talls, I've got two short. So there's two chances out of one, two, three, four. There's two chances out of three, four. So I have two out of four, which equals 50%. So there's a 50% chance that the offspring will be tall. And then I have two, one, two, okay, out of one, two, three, four, that the offspring will be short. So I have two out of four, or 50% chance that the offspring will be short. Okay. All right. So it really just breaks it down into short, simple pieces, short, simple steps. Okay. And you can see that the Punnett squares are not overly complex. And we could do a million different combinations with this and use different letters. I could use L and then L and then L, L, and do my combinations here. Okay. And come up with this. Remember that, let's say this is LL. This is dealing with, oh, I don't know. Let's say it's the length. Maybe it's the length of my hand. Okay, I have short, stubby hands or long length of my fingers, long fingers. Either way, the L's, okay, the letters are the genetic code. Okay, and we call that genotype. Okay, the L's represent a physical characteristic. Okay, that physical characteristic. Okay, we call that phenotype. And then if I have two letters that are the same, that is homozygous. If I have letters that are different, that is heterozygous. And then capital letters equal dominant, and lowercase letters equal recessive. All right. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of practice here with you. I'm going to take this Punnett square right here, and I'm going to fill it in, and I want you to obviously just think your way through it. Okay, you might want to get out a piece of paper and write this down. So let me give you some genetic code, some genotype. I'm going to use the letter Z, capital Z, lowercase z, lowercase z, lowercase z. Okay, we're going to say that Z stands for um, the size of my nose. Capital Z equals big nose. Lowercase z equals small nose. All right. So I want you to tell me the genotypes, okay, and the phenotypes that you get out of this particular combination. What are the genotypes and the phenotypes? Okay. So go ahead and complete this cross right here. So what are the possible genotypes that I have, the genetic codes? Well, I have heterozygous, okay, dominant, and then I also have homozygous recessive. What do those phenotypes equal? Well, phenotypes I've got right here, big dominant big nose with recessive small nose, which means it's going to be big nose, dominant big nose, okay? But I also have recessive small nose, recessive small nose, recessive small nose. So I have both. What's the chances that these offspring will have a big nose? What's the chances? What's the probability that these offspring will have a big nose? Well, I've got big nose here, small, small, small. So I've got one out of one, two, two, three, four. One out of four. So one out of four, which equals 25% big nose. And then what's the probability that this offspring will have a small nose? I've got one, two, three out of four. So three out of four, which equals 75% small nose. Okay. All right. So this has been an introduction and practice over Punnett squares. You may need to go back and review this and watch this video again to help you out and gain a better understanding because there's a lot of terms. But when you guys come back to class, we will spend time practicing these Punnett squares and reinforcing the vocabulary that we've used during this time.